Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name is Thomas, back on the channel today in the midst of a very stressful week as an Evertonian. Relegation, well, I wouldn't say looms, I wouldn't say relegation looms this weekend, but it's certainly a massive possibility and a very stressful time to be a fan of Everton. But we are linked with a lot of takeover rumours as well. Of course, in the past couple of weeks, there's been various rumours coming out about 777 partners and MSP. So, of course, today we've Paul has returned to the channel. The asked to tell us, maybe give us a bit more insight about what is going on at the club and trying to make sense of what has been a whole lot of noise around a time that where the club might not even be in the Premier League next season. So, Paul, thank you very much for coming on. How are you feeling this week?
I'm cool, mate. No stress whatsoever. my nose has just got about 8 foot longer. What a time to be alive, eh? It's just incredible, isn't it? I think most of us, as the season has gone on, expected us to be in this position where, our security, our safety, our maintaining our position in the Premier League wouldn't be known to the last game of the season. But what a terrible indictment of how the club's been run in recent years. And I think, speaking to all of my friends, the overwhelming, yes, there's some tension and there's some stress, but I think the overwhelming emotion is one of sadness. Sadness that we're in this position. And knowing that, if we win, we win, and that's it. But that there is a prospect of going down, and then what the consequences of that are. Now, as a fan and everything else, all of us are going to be as positive as we possibly can be in the lead up to the game. But the reality is there that we go into the last game of the season with our lowest points total ever, and our future's not assured yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we all. Nobody hopes we'd be in this situation again. I mean, sincerely, don't think there'll be any pitch invasions this year. I think there's a very different atmosphere surrounding the relegation, but especially where the fixtures came out at the start of the season, and we saw Bournemouth at home on the last day of the season. It did seem like that's absolutely going to be critical. Probably including Bournemouth, they managed to get themselves, away to safety. But I think when we all saw the fixtures, it kind of seemed like this was going to go down to the last day of the season.
And it also seemed like last August or last July when the fixtures came out, a bit of a sense of relief that it was Bournemouth for our last game, not Man City, for example, or a team that we always lose against, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, well, amongst potentially being in the Championship next season, which is what you'd think the main focus would be at the football club, but no, here we are. It's this. There's been rumours rumbling on for several months now that, and we knew that Mashiri confirmed himself that he was looking for investment to bridge that gap in the stadium finance, and it looks like now, after reports this week, MSP have secured an exclusivity deal, and just as we would start recording, you tweeted yourself that the 777 partners had completely dropped out. So what seems to be the situation there now?
Well, actually, in a sense, all of this talk about investment, be it investment in the club or be it providing debt for the stadium, is actually as critical as the fight against relegation, because we're in, and we've talked about, you and I have talked about it on this podcast on many occasions this year about financially, because now Mashiri is not in a position where either he can or whether he wants to put more money into the club. I know he signed a letter that went to the auditors that said he would support the club if it was necessary to do so. But it's become very obvious, hasn't it, in recent months that he doesn't want to do that, or he can't, or possibly even he can't do that. So the need for investment is almost as important. Obviously, if we get relegated, that may have a longer term impact on the club, and certainly would have a longer term impact on the fan base. But if we don't get this investment in the next sort of few weeks, then we face, whether we're relegated or not, two different problems if we are relegated or if we stay up. But let's focus on if we stay up first. We've any reasonable cash flow analysis of the business says that we've probably spent all of the money that we had. So, if you look back to the last accounts, although the debt position didn't look good, there was quite a bit of cash in the business, and there was 50 million worth of prepayments made to Lango Rourke. So relatively comfortable, although not good, certainly not in a critical state. But I think as the year has gone on, and because Moshiri hasn't been able to put in any more money other than the 70 million that he put in at the early part of the financial year, and we've increased our debt with rights and media funding by another 50 million to 200 million. That indicates that the business is, a bit short of cash, and it's short of cash because we're still loss making, but we've also got, huge obligations still in terms of the stadium. So the fact that it's come at a time when actually really the focus should just be on what's happening on the pitch, again, is another indication of how important it is that we get this done. And you're right that for a while, going back to January, MSP have appeared interested. In fact, they were at the Southampton game, weren't they? But then this
a great advert for the club.
Well, yeah. I mean, how can it be safe for the potential investors to attend when it's not safe for the directors to attend? Exactly. That's how much we think of our future investors. So they were obviously that they've been involved for some time, and then this other company, another US investment group that has interest in several football clubs, 777, have come along, and they were looking at it from a different perspective. MSP, I think, the main interest, at least initially, was to fund the stadium, and through funding the stadium, then they may take a stake in the club at a later date. I think that's changed in recent weeks. So whilst the funding of the stadium, or the next round of funding for the stadium, is still part of their thinking, I think they're also looking at it from the point of view that the club needs working capital, i.e. it needs cash in the bank in order to continue its operations. So I think we'll see when MSP finally conclude the deal after next weekend, that they will be putting money in for the stadium, but they'll also be putting money in to support the day-to-day running of the club. And if by any chance the worst was to happen and we were relegated, then they would probably have to put more money in, because one of the issues about relegation is the fact that rights and media funding have the legal right to ask for much of the money that they've previously lent to the club, to ask for that to be returned as a result of relegation, in the same way that Burnley last year had a deal with Michael Dell's company, MSD. They ended up having to pay back 64 million of their borrowings just because they'd been relegated. And Everton would be in a similar position, although I fear that the figure is higher than what Burnley had to pay, 64 million. I think our figure will be well in excess of 100 million. I don't know the precise figure, but I think it will be in excess of 100 million. So there's going to be big cash calls on the business, and the business doesn't have that cash at this moment in time. And that's why ultimately MSP coming in now, they're probably striking a very hard bargain in order to get into the club at this moment in time, in order to support the club at this time. But it's Moshiri doesn't have anywhere else to turn to.
And we know that the owner of the club is kind of the master of confusion, the fact that we're all having to sit and speculate about what's going on at the club. And I think the main hope around the potential investment from MSP, because it looked like 777, I'm not sure if you mentioned there, they were looking to purchase a larger stake at the club, but MSP is very much the investment, as you mentioned, that could be put towards the stadium and in terms of the cash flow of the club. But I think, as I just mentioned there, that what the fans want to know is, how is this going to affect the club at board level? Because, of course, if they're going to invest a significant amount of money, especially with the club as shambalically ran as it is now, they are going to want multiple seats on the board.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, nobody, nobody is going to invest in Everton Football Club without saying we need to have greater influence over what happens in the future, even if they're just taking a minority stake. They're going to want to have an element of control over how the club spends its money in the future, and you know what decisions the club makes. So when Mashiri brings in somebody like MSP, they're going to say, right, so we're going to lend you this amount of money, or we're going to invest some of this money into the football club in return for shares, or in return for shares at a later, at a later date. But actually, what we want to do is the following: we want a couple of people on the board. We probably want the people who have been responsible for the mess that's been created to leave the board. So in those instances, I think we're talking about the chairman and the CEO. And also, we want control, even though we won't necessarily have a majority on a new board, or we certainly won't have a majority of shares. We want the ability to control various items of expenditure. So what happens in transfer windows, what our budgets will be, who can we buy, who can we sell, not necessarily the footballing decisions per se in terms of who the individuals are, but in terms of what the budgets are. They will certainly want to have a big say in that. They'll also want to have a big say in the remaining expenditure with Langer Rourke, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if part of this deal is a renegotiation of the Langer Rourke contract. Not necessarily that Langer Rourke don't get paid as much, but that the payment terms change. So it might be that we end up, extending our payment terms in order to help the club's cash flow position, and in order to stop MSP having to put quite as much money in as they might have to. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of change, and I think it has to be viewed as change for the better. Obviously, we don't know these individuals. We don't really. I mean, we can look at what they've done in the businesses that they've invested in, and there doesn't seem to be a huge number of alarm bells. But there doesn't seem to be a huge number of huge wins neither. And my concern would be that actually what we need is somebody that can come in, or somebody that can bring other people in, that can make a huge change to the business very, very quickly. So people who are used to not just becoming minority investors and carrying on the business the way it always has been, but people who can come in and sort of revolutionize Everton Football Club, make Everton Football Club a professional, focused, forward-looking organisation, which obviously, three adjectives which don't fit Everton at this moment in time. So I'll be really interested once they do come in, once they've put the money on the table, as to them, and hopefully them explaining exactly what their roles are going to be, and how Everton Football Club is different the day after they've invested than the day before in terms of how it's run, and what reassurances can they give us, the fan base. And I think we genuinely. Some people criticise me for saying this, but I think we genuinely need to know what the future holds with these new investors, and they have to, in order to win over the support of the fan base, to win the trust of the fan base, they have to explain in very, very simple terms that people who are not business people, people who are not finance people, can understand, and give Evertonians some hope that how the club's been run in the last 6 or 7 years, and many years before that, is going to be different in the future, because ultimately that's the only way we're going to see a better Everton, isn't it? I mean, just throwing more money at the Everton that is at the moment doesn't work, because Mashiri's been trying that for years. So why would it work next year when it hasn't worked for any of the previous 7 years? So that, to me, that's the key thing. What changes is it going to bring into the club, and what reassurance and what hope can you give the fan base that actually, we're going to be able to compete, because we're actually now going to be run like a proper football club.
And we know that they have, stakes in clubs in Germany, Portugal, Spain, as you mentioned there. But obviously, it's quite hard to identify, you know, as you mentioned there, the instant impact, because of course there are rumors. I think I saw a tweet before saying they're going to bring a data driven model or something. Of course, that's all pure speculation. There's not much we can know about that. But in terms of the actual investment into the club, I think people will want to know the likes of, well, how are they financing the deal, and is this kind of going to be it? Well, I don't know what you speculate about their investment going in the next few years. I think there was a rumor on Grand Old Team talking about the expansion of their investment in the next few years. Very, well, impossible to verify, but not necessarily, who the people are that are investing in the club. But what kind of form is this investment going to take on? Not just this year, but in the next few years.
I mean, there are some fairly well-founded rumours that MSP want to take a sort of like a 3-stage approach to this. So here's an initial investment, which is predominantly loan-based, and if it goes well, then we'll convert that loan into equity. And then when we do that, and that might be, for example, in a year's time when the next bit of funding for the stadium is needed, before the stadium opens in the following year. If that goes well, then they'll repeat the exercise. They'll put more money in as debt. And if that works out okay, so in year 2, year 3, perhaps, they'll convert that into equity, so that they will then have a much bigger stake in the club, and possibly a bigger stake than Fard Mashiri. And then finally, the third phase of that would be to buy up the whole club, so buy out Mashiri effectively. But that will be phase 3. When is phase 3? There's no guarantees to this that it's going to happen, but it would have to be A, after the stadium is built and paid for, and B, that there's some stability in terms of our footballing performance, that we're not still hanging around, the bottom quarter of the Premier League. So, there's lots of things that need to happen in order for this three-phased investment, which would lead to an ultimate takeover, to occur. But then, it's not going to occur for a few years because of all these stages that we have to go through. I think in order to satisfy MSP that Everton is the right thing to invest in, I think they're being extremely cautious. And I think, given where Everton is, and now given that they're probably the only game in town, that they effectively hold all of the negotiating cards. So Mashiri's backed himself into a corner on this, and time is no longer his friend. He's always been one to push things further and further out whenever he could. But now he's got to the point where he can no longer do that. So,
yeah, and I think something it's always good to speculate about. Of course, nothing that we can actually prove, but the likelihood of the deal. Of course, the widespread rumors this week that exclusivity agreement was signed with them. I can't verify this, but I think was an exclusivity agreement agreed with Peter Kenyon back in the summer. We knew that was never really going to materialise, but we have been in this position before where it looks like investment might be coming into the club. So how likely do you see it being, and is it going to kind of maybe take a different form if we are relegated? Will they pull out of the deal if we're relegated? What does seem to be the parameters to it?
Well, I think obviously if we are relegated, if they've just put money in the initial, actually they're not going to put the money in before they know whether we're relegated or not. Would they pull out? Well, investing in the stadium shouldn't be that different even if we're relegated, because you're looking for repayment from gate receipts, naming rights and stuff. And obviously if we were in the Championship, it would be lower than it would be in the Premier League, but the stadium is still going to pay for itself, even if we're in the Championship. The big question would be whether or not they would invest in the club itself. So, like we were talking at the beginning of this chat, whether they'd be prepared to provide the working capital that's needed, and whether they'd be prepared to perhaps cover much of the repayment back to rights and media funding, the offshore lender that we use. Nobody knows the answer to that except what's his name, Jaffe, Morad, the two main partners of MSP. So at this stage, all we can do is speculate. It'd be fantastic. Yeah. It'd be fantastic if they came out this afternoon and said, "We've got this exclusivity. This is what we're thinking of doing, and subject to everything going right, this is what we will do." But I don't think they're going to say that, are they?
No, I can't see them tweeting that out later, no, unfortunately. But just kind of, I think we've discussed the potential investment quite a lot there, but something that kind of maybe points towards why we're in the position we are this week, and something slightly off topic, is where Decore's contract has, of course, been extended into next year ahead of whether we know we're going to be relegated or not. It looks like there's rumours he's on a wage of up to 100k. Now, in the club statement, they said they moved to do it before the deadline, potentially before it was stipulated in the contract it had to be triggered before the end of the season. But it just kind of sums up the way the club's ran, isn't it? That even if we're not certain that we're in the Premier League, we've just offered a player who kind of dropped out the side for a long time. Of course, he's massively back under favour under Sean Dyche, but we've just offered him potentially another 100k for another year, potentially in the Championship.
Well, another 100k a week for another year.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at it. There's that way that, again, the club has backed itself into a poor negotiating position. The second way of looking at it is that by giving him an extension, Decore actually becomes an asset once more, because we could actually and we tried to sell him in January but couldn't because there was only 6 months left on his contract. But there would be the probability or the possibility that if we did drop into the Championship, that we could sell him and earn a fee off him in the summer, even though he's only got 1 year left on his contract. And obviously it wouldn't be a very high fee, but something is better than nothing. And assuming that we stay in the Premier League, well, we've got him at no replacement cost, because had he gone, it's not as if the squad's full of people who can take his position. We haven't got somebody, that thing that Marcel Brands talked about when he first came to the club, about always having two people for the same position. That was his aim, that was his objective. Clearly we don't have that. I struggle to think of anywhere across the pitch where we have two competent people fighting for the same position.
No, well, heading into a final day relegation battle with seemingly no fullbacks faced at the club, potentially Mikolenko, sums that one up quite nicely.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's not. So, in terms of Decore, well, for him, it's a bit of a no lose situation, because if we stay, he's got another year at wages that he wouldn't get anywhere else, and if we go down, he's probably got the option, because Everton will have to sell players, of moving somewhere else. So, from his perspective, it's almost a no lose situation. You
can see it's a no-brainer as well, especially as we know, he basically was completely out of favour, tried to sell him in January. It's only under Dyche that he's made this resurgence. Yeah. He probably didn't see this extension coming, and I know when he first kind of broke into the team and scored a couple of goals when the new manager came in, I was still thinking, when we don't need to renew his contract. But as you mentioned there, that the replacement cost will obviously be heavy, but this was a player who we've now renewed for another year, who was completely out of the picture just a few months ago.
Yeah, and to be fair to him, he's done pretty, apart from the stupidity of the sending off, which still may, have significant consequences for us if we do go down. We'll look back at that moment and his three match suspension and wonder what would have been the consequences of him being able to play in those games. But aside from that, I think his contribution and his commitment has been excellent. I think also, let's talk about Yerry Mina. I think Mina, since he's come back in the side, or very limited opportunities he's had at the end of the season, but he's done everything he could possibly do, which again says something about his character.
Well, I think it's quite widely accepted, isn't it, that Mina, if he could stay fit, would probably be our best centre half by a mile. I mean, Tarkovsky's had a good season. He's had his moments though, but I think we've all known for a while that when Mina's in the team, we are a lot better. But it's just the fact that he's never in the team, and it's tricky to see how the club can extend his contract considering how much money he's cost just to sit on the bench. But well, not even on the bench, on the injury table back at Finch Farm. But it is the kind of decision you can see the club making to renew his contract and what is definitely extortionate wages for the amount of game time we get out of him every year.
I'd be very surprised if Yerry Mina stayed. Very, very surprised. Although, if you look at, I did this figure a few weeks ago. If you compare how many points per game we get when he's playing as against how many points per game we get when he's not playing, the difference is about 0.6 of a point. And that doesn't sound like very significant, but over say a 30-game season, that's 18 points. Difference. So had you played in 18 more games, had you played in 30 more games, that might have been, based on the averages, we'd have an extra 18 points, which would obviously put us in a very different position in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is the state we're now heading into the weekend. We may as well quickly mention the match. Of course, Bournemouth safe now. They've had a fantastic turnaround in the second half of their season. I know when Gary O'Neill came in, it kind of looked like a strange decision, as it did with Sellers at Southampton, and now his contract hasn't been renewed. But Bournemouth safe, hopefully turn up at Goodison Park feeling fairly relaxed, maybe not too up for the game, hopefully not as up for the game as our lads will be. But how are you feeling about this prospect?
I think it just depends what Everton turns up, really. I think to a degree Bournemouth how they view the game is inconsequential, because it's just down to us. It's whether or not we can, just raise the standards. One more time. So it almost become cliche, hasn't it, to do another Brighton performance, even though we're at home. And it's going to be difficult because of the lack of availability of certain players. But that's what we've got to do. And if we do it, great. It's going to be, it'll be a joyous occasion to see Everton perhaps, 1 or 2 goals ahead going into the second half. But I think assuming that, and I think this is going to be the difference between this year and last year, once we get to the point of safety, once the final whistle goes, it's going to be very interesting to see what the reaction of the crowd is. I can't believe it's going to be joyous celebration. I think there's going to be a lot of anger and a lot of upset and a lot of frustration. The frustrations that Evertonians have been carrying for months and months and months may well come out at the final whistle. And I hope it doesn't come out in terms of stupid, ridiculous behaviour. I think it legitimately can come out as anger, expressing opinions about the owner and expressing opinions about the board and the management of the club. But I hope it doesn't come out in terms of, as I say, stupid behaviour, pitch invasions, breaking things, violence, all that sort of stuff. That's not Everton, and that's not what we want, is it?
Yeah, but
we want to express our opinions. We want to tell the board, tell the owner, if they don't already know, which they must know, that what they've done is not acceptable, and we want to tell the world that some of the best supporters in football, if not the best supporters in football, will no longer tolerate this approach to running our football club, because at the end of the day, whilst the commercial ownership and the economic ownership sits with Mashiri, it's still our football club, and it will always be our football club, regardless of who owns it or who invests in it. And I think that's a message that needs to come across on Sunday, that it is our football club, and our football club deserves to be run in a better manner than it has been for many, many years.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Nobody can legitimately complain against that stance. We supported the football team throughout the whole season. People have accepted that it was wrong to protest during the season, or rather, not necessarily it was wrong, but it was probably wiser not to protest during the season. But once the season's over, once the final whistle goes, then there's no reason not to protest. There's no reason not to tell Fahad Moshiri, not to tell the board exactly what their thoughts are.
Yeah, hopefully that can be done with with on the back of safety and not relegation. But the task seems relatively simple, doesn't it? I mean, there are an entire raft of permutations that we can come up with. It is a three-way battle for one spot in the Premier League, but 3 points at home to Bournemouth should be a very manageable task. We'll have to see how we get on. But Paul, that is pretty much all we have time for today. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, no problems. Look forward to talking about our survival and about our new investors sometime next month.
Oh, absolutely, and maybe a year from now, hopefully we don't have to do this video for the third year running, where we potentially talk about the club being relegated this weekend. But thank you all very much for listening. Do check out all our social media down below. Check out all the other videos and hopefully a strong result on Sunday. Hopefully, as Paul mentioned, they're relatively easy. Can anyone foresee that 1 or 2 up in the early stages of the game for a nice relaxing afternoon? I'm not entirely convinced, but thank you all very much for watching. Join us next time. Goodbye.